Hello, everyone, and welcome to this recording. My name is Shola Bulu, and today I just decided, and it's of course it's the season of Easter, so I just decided to record these two videos. I know some of you may not be watching it; you may watch it much later, but then you just so that you know that this was like my Easter gift to my everyone that is subscribing um, on this channel. So this month we are talking about crisis and crisis communications, crisis management. You can see a lot of content has been coming up on that because we have a course coming up on the 24th, and this is just generally one of those in the build up to that. So I just decided to talk about the 7 crisis communications mistakes to avoid. These are some of the most common mistakes that I have seen in my career, not just in terms of what I have seen, happen like close in things that I've been involved with, but also just watching and observing, following the news and seeing how people manage things. Funny, if you're someone who has interest in crisis communications and crisis management, just following the news and following how people manage things, when they happen to businesses, brands, and organizations can teach you a lot of things. So let's get right into this because I want this to be a pretty short video. So one of the most common mistakes that I observe um, in crisis communications mistakes that people make during in terms of crisis is one, timeliness, too quick or too slow to respond. Timeliness. In other words, something has hit, it has broken. It is either a very common mistake is either people just being too slow or too quick to respond. So you don't even know what's going on. You haven't tried to find out what's going on. And you're just really coming out very fast to say, oh, nothing happened. I mean, this happens a lot in the political setting, and you do it the wrong way, it's really going to go. Yeah, don't be too quick to respond. You should also be too slow. So there's a right balance. Within 24 hours, you should say something. But at least make sure you get the facts before you come out and debunk something. If it, it may really have happened, and you have to eat your words like 2, 3, 4 hours after, and then by then you've lost credibility, and things may really just be going south from then. So the second very common crisis communications mistakes that I observe and that you should try to avoid is not hitting the right notes. Now, what do I mean by this? This means, and remember, we're talking about this is a crisis period where there's a lot of emotions, the tensions are high, maybe a lot of things have happened, maybe people, there's just impact that has been really devastating. And then you don't rather than you need to hit the right notes at that point in terms of what is it people are expecting to hear from you that are at the center of the crisis, the brand, the organization. You need to hit that note. If they're expecting to hear clarity, they're hearing to find out that confirmation about certain things, you need to give, or they want assurance, you need to be able to hit the right notes. It's not just to go out with a statement and then you are saying something completely different from what people expected to hear. That is a very common communication mistake, and I'm calling it a communication mistake because at the end of the day you communicated. These are things that go wrong with the communication, so the crisis is already there, but then the mistakes, the errors in communications can then make the situation even much more worse. So not hitting the right notes in terms of the content that you put out. Number 2. Number 3, language. Oh my goodness, poor choice of words. Oh, this is so common. Yeah, as in the poor choice of words. I gave an example the other day about a news medium in Nigeria, while reporting on a crisis, used the word only to describe, to talk about fatalities. They were trying to say, oh, it wasn't this number, the figure was much lower, which of course was not even factually correct, but that's beside the point. But then they used the word only. That word totally through was the most offensive choice of word, and I think it was, I don't know whether it was intentional or just not misunderstanding of the use of language, because they still kept the post up, but it's a very poor choice of words because it has really undermined their credibility. And all they were not even at the heart of the crisis, they were just reporting about a crisis. So very poor choice of words, and we see this happening a lot. And then when you now see you wanted to put out a message, communications to either explain or clarify, you ended up with, because of the poor choice of words, you ended up saying something that really antagonized everybody and made it worse. So your message was lost. So again, that is a crisis communication mistake, because the intention of the messaging was to clarify, was to provide assurance, and at the end of the day ended up annoying everybody. So these are the sort of mistakes that we see happening pretty frequently. which takes us down to number 4. Another very common mistake is sequence, going public before engaging key stakeholders. This happens a lot, particularly in situations where maybe like there are some aggrieved parties and everything. You're just so quick to respond. You don't even know whether you should talk to them behind the scenes. And then, of course, by the time you now respond, they now come back and fact check you. There's now a media war going on. If there's an aggrieved or an impacted party, particularly like a family, and it's not like you're in court, or even if you're in court, explore the opportunities of what you can do offline before going public. Also, there are certain stakeholders that shouldn't be reading about your press statements your media, your statements in the press. You should have sent it to them before them. But if even the antagonists, people that you're against, going public before giving an opportunity for dialogue on certain issues can be risky, because you don't know what they're going to say. I see a lot of people assuming that the aggrieved person will not go public with the information that they have, but many times the media statement that now comes out annoys them, and then they now do that. So you need to think about that sequence is very important. It's not just to go out, but if I go out and I say this, what is this person going to say? Oh, am I going to, as will some of my shareholders or my investors or my lenders be upset that I said this? Just making sure you talk to the people that you need to have spoken to before you go public. Because once you go public, you can't take it back unless you want to, now apologize and say everything you said was wrong, or somebody made a mistake, which is really, again, totally, it's not best practice at all. And it also makes you credible, because the next time you issue a statement, people are like, okay, maybe you're going to walk it back again in the next 24 hours. So yeah, let's wait and see. So narrative, oh no, this is a very common one. Allowing the external narrative to spin out of control. I mean, I've seen this happen a lot, where people, they look at, they say, oh, they're just reporting this, they're just saying this on social media, it doesn't mean anything. I'm like, really? It doesn't mean anything. It has a digital footprint, particularly if mainstream media is carrying it. But even if mainstream media is not carrying it, and this narrative, and now you notice I'm not using the word stories, because stories are just elements, they are seeds, but the narrative is the tree. So if a narrative has been birthed, it's actually, there's a solid narrative, which is you are the fault, or you are at fault for doing this, or you are not responsible, you are not credible, you are not trustworthy. And then there are different proof points and stories, underneath, underpinning that. If that narrative is not true, or it's not factual, or doesn't give the full picture, why would you allow it to just spin out of control? You need to start reining things back in. This is a very, very serious crisis communications mistake. And by the way, in the course on, these are the things we're going to be talking about a lot, and really trying to help people understand in the course on Thursday, on the 24th of April. Then sentiment. This is another very common mistake. In fact, when I was writing this common crisis communications common mistakes, I was like, I was deleting, because I was like, which seven, because there are so many mistakes that I've observed in the communication space. Not even talk of in the management space, but because there's crisis management and then there's crisis communications, which is the communications of what you're doing to manage it. But the actual resolution there, but this crisis communications, oh my goodness. So sentiment, this is an extremely common mistake. Dismissing or ignoring or not addressing the underlying sentiment. Now, a lot of people believe that because crisis is always emotional. That's why it's called a crisis. When we're in a crisis situation, logic goes out of the window to a very large extent. The reaction is from the emotions. So you can't dismiss it, you can't overlook it, you cannot ignore it. If you are issuing a statement, you have to address that underlying sentiment. If not, people are going to be dissatisfied, they'll be even more angry with you. They'll be like, what did you say? What was the point of the statement? They are likely to get angry. And if you now in the process of, and then another thing, you can't dismiss the sentiment. You have no right to do that. You can't dismiss the sentiment. Rather, you clarify, you provide context, you reassure, you explain. If it's that is a misconception, then explain and provide evidence to show that this is the truth situation of things, so that the sentiments, but you have to address it. I mean, these are the three in this number 7. There are like 3 different aspects of it: dismissing, ignoring, not addressing. Some people don't even recognize that there's an underlying sentiment. That undertones is what gives life to a crisis. It's not necessarily the overtones or what's being expressly said. What are the undertones? What are the amplifiers? The things happening in the environment that is making this even more sensitive? Things that have happened before. that underlying sentiment needs to be addressed. So generally speaking, what I observe in all my 15 to 20 years of active crisis communications and management, a lack of understanding about the severity of the situation and what needs to be done to resolve it is the major issue that makes people do the wrong things and things go very wrong in a crisis situation. Crisis is not too much about what happens, it's about how you respond to it. When there's undue focus on response rather than resolution and reputation, you're likely to get into a whole lot of problem. So these are the 7 most common crisis communications mistakes that I would say to avoid. There are many other more, and you can add some in the comments. Yeah, but I just thought to share this with you at this time. And if you can avoid some of these mistakes when you have a crisis, even if you're not sure what to do, at least you will not make things worse, even if you're not absolutely able to make them better in the interim. But there are ways to make things better. And if you join our course next week, we'll go into the nitty gritties of how to manage that. But these are just top of mind 7 common crisis communications mistakes that you will do well to avoid. Thank you, and see you on the next video, and hopefully see you in class as well.